All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Grizzly's Cave. This is Grizzly Andrew, and tonight this will actually just be a solo episode. But before I touch base on the subject that I've been wanting to cover for a while, I do want to remind the fans that the next NAW wrestling event will be December the 13th at 7 p.m. at the Nebo Community Center in Nebo, Kentucky. It is Winter Warfare. The doors will open at 6 p.m. Ticket prices are as follows. It is free for anybody ages 0 to 5. Anyone ages 6 to 12, it'll be $5. And anyone ages 13 and up is $8. And concessions will be made available. This is a family-friendly promotion, and I promise folks you will not be disappointed. So if you're able to make it to the show, definitely make it, because I promise it's an incredible experience. It's a really great promotion. Alright, so like I said, this is going to be a solo episode. What I will be reading to you is from www.fmwwrestling.us /Hayabusa.html. A lot of the names and places that I am going to mention, I will do the best that I can to pronounce them. However, they will probably sound butchered, but just bear with me. Hayabusa is one of my favorite Japanese wrestlers. He is the innovator of the Phoenix Splash. He is also well known for the Falcon Arrow and the 450 Splash. I remember watching some of his matches, and I was thinking to myself, it's a shame I did not get to watch any of his matches back when I was a kid. I had never heard of him until about 2 years ago, so this would have been around the summer or fall of 2023. I was watching a video called The Rise and Fall of FMW from Cultaholic Wrestling, and I'd had my YouTube set up on autoplay at the time. So after I watched The Rise and Fall of FMW, it would show some videos of Hayabusa's matches, starting with his battle with Onita in May of 1995. Incredible match. However, I did not agree with the ending. I have covered that on one of my earlier episodes on Grizzly's Cave. Excuse me. If I'm not mistaken, should have been episode 2. It's sad how Hayabusa's wrestling career ended, which will be covered later. And I will throw this out there as well. There are other videos on Hayabusa. Let's see, there is one called Pioneering the Frontier. It was a video by the channel called Grapple Vision, and I've watched that a few times. Hayabusa gets mentioned, although it more so focuses on Onita. There is a Rise and Fall of Hayabusa that was made by the Grapple Vision channel. There are some other videos. There's one that I'll cover later, but and I'll actually talk about this later. I do want to go ahead and throw this out there. This is just going to be a part 1 episode, because there's so much information that I've come across on this link that I just mentioned that I'm going to be reading from. So there's going to be several parts for Hayabusa. But there was another video I'd watched that had 3 matches. It was actually from a VHS. It was called, if I remember the title correctly, it was The Flying Assassin or something, and it had 3 matches that he was in against Masato Tanaka, the Gladiator, who for the ECW fans will remember as Mike Awesome, and then Mr. Ganosuke, which we'll talk about him some more here in a little bit. But anyways, we're going to be on this drive for a pretty good while, so just buckle your seatbelts and let's rock and roll. So, for any of you gamers, if you ever played WCW versus the World on PlayStation 1, I will admit that I had that video game. So there were several different promotions that you could pick from, and there was one promotion called the Dead or Alive promotion, which was basically FMW. But I believe there was licensing issues or something like that, so they had to rename some of the characters. If you picked a character called Habanero from the Dead or Alive promotion, that was Hayabusa. If you played WCW NWO World Tour on Nintendo 64, the character known as Hannibal for the Dead or Alive promotion was Hayabusa. But anyways, so Hayabusa, real name was A.G. Izaki. He was born on November 29th, 1968 in Kawashiri in the Kumamoto Prefecture of Japan. Izaki and his parents would only stay there for a year before moving to the Hinagunaka Nishimichi Yatsushiro Kumamoto in Japan. Izaki was actually the firstborn child to his parents. His parents would welcome another son 3 years later named Takanori. And then shortly after that, they would move again to Fukuhama-cho, Okayama in 1972. The reason for the move was because AG's father was arguing with his father-in-law. And on a sidebar, folks, being married and divorced twice myself, I can safely say I've had quite a few disagreements as well as arguments with previous fathers-in-laws, so I understand. Izaki's mother's parents ran a very popular Japanese-style hot springs hotel, and generally their clientele were, quote, VIP. Now, this hotel was started back in the 1940s, and because their clientele were, we will say, quote, VIPs, the family was very wealthy. Whenever Izaki's family wound up moving to Okayama, this unfortunately resulted in them having financial struggles. Izaki's father was a driver's ed instructor while in Kumamoto, and he would also take another job as a taxi driver to help take care of his family, and I completely understand that, and I'm sure there's several listeners that have had to work multiple jobs just to make ends meet, so I totally understand where he's coming from. Eventually, the conflict between Izaki's father and grandparents would be resolved, and the Izakis would move back to Yatsushiro Kumamoto, and eventually Izaki's family would take over the hotel, and then they would turn it in. It would transform from a VIP hotel to a public hotel. After the family moved back, they began living in the hotel in 1977 as AG was 8 years old. He had originally dreaded the move back to Kumamoto. He came back from Okayama with what they call a Kansai accent due to living in central Japan, while all the kids in school were from Kumamoto and would have a Kumamoto accent due to living in southern Japan. Izaki would enjoy living in the hotel. Apparently at this hotel they had real giant bathtubs, and those bathtubs were called Gomen Buro bathtubs, and apparently they required firewood, and so AG's job would be to collect firewood to put in these bathtubs or put underneath the bathtubs. I'm not really sure how that worked, but Ezaki would like to watch television during the day, but at nighttime his father would have control of the television. Speaking, and I'll speak from experience on that, my father, God bless him, when he got home from work, which he retired from the Paducah and Louisville Railroad, when he got home from work, he'd sit in his recliner, prop his feet up, have a beer in one hand, have the remote control in the other, and he took over the television set. And it would vary whatever we watched and whatnot. But Ezaki's father enjoyed watching baseball, and his favorite team was the, bear with me folks, the Yomiuri Giants. So Ezaki would begin following them as well, and baseball actually wound up becoming his first love, and this was due to watching baseball with his father. Now, in 1977, Ezaki would begin watching pro wrestling. His grandfather, now I don't know if this was his maternal grandfather or paternal grandfather, but anyways, one of his grandfathers enjoyed watching pro wrestling, and the first wrestler that really stood out to Ezaki was Mil Mascaras, and some people will get the reference, No Yob. But Mil Mascaras would become Ezaki's first favorite wrestler because of his colorful mask. Also, his grandfather would take him to some of the All Japan women's shows, and if y'all haven't checked them out yet, there are videos for that promotion on YouTube as well. You can find certain wrestlers like Aja Kong, Bull Nakano, let's see, I'm wanting to say Linus Asuka and a bunch of others. Some of those names actually appeared for WWF back during the New Generation era, so like around the mid-90s and whatnot. But anyways, give it a look whenever y'all get a chance. Ezaki's love of baseball would still take priority over wrestling, though at this point he would wind up joining a baseball club in the 4th grade in 1978. Ezaki had dreams of being like the Yomiuri Giants' great Sadaharu O, who was known as the home run king in Japan. However, there would be an issue for Ezaki when it came to baseball, and that it would be that he was not very good at it. He normally would bat in the number 8 spot due to not being a very good hitter, and he played outfield, and unfortunately he made a lot of errors while being an outfielder. Now, I do speak from experience on this. So I played baseball from T-ball, which would be like age 4, all the way up through my last year of summer league, so that would have been when I was 15, and that was the summer after my freshman year of high school. The last couple of years that I played, I was not a very good hitter, but I was really good at playing outfield. I usually batted in the 8th or 9th spot, so I get it. Ezaki would still move forward playing baseball, though, hoping to get better one day. Ezaki would begin to really start enjoying pro wrestling when he was in junior high. Back in 1981, there was a new junior heavyweight sensation, and you all will know who I'm talking about. His name was Tiger Mask. Many of the students at his school would talk about Tiger Mask. Ezaki would watch the weekly shows, however, he was unfamiliar with the moves. He would continue to watch New Japan, and then he would learn about a rival in the junior heavyweight division for All Japan Pro Wrestling, and he was a fellow by the name of Atsushi Onita, who eventually became the founder of FMW. Azaki was not a big fan of Onita because he felt like Onita could not compare to Tiger Mask. Tiger Mask would end up retiring from New Japan, and then Azaki would start to follow wrestlers such as Stan Hansen and the late Bruiser Brody. And I did not know this about Hayabusa, but he actually, in his later teens, apparently had watched WWF, Jim Crockett Promotions, and the AWA. So I thought that was pretty cool whenever I come across that. Azaki would finish junior high in 1983 and was set on attending Yatsushiro Industrial High School, which was a school that he would have to take a test in order to be able to attend. So it was it was basically an entrance exam. On a sidebar here, back in 1997, when my mother and I moved from Princeton, Kentucky to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, she wanted me to try out this Christian school in Hopkinsville called Heritage Christian Academy. Well, in order to get in there, you had to take a test. I took the test, I passed, I got into the school. There are some days, even though it's been almost 30 years, there are some days I wished I did not take that test and I did not go to school there. That school wound up developing a reputation called Hypocrite Christian Academy, but that's a story for another day. Azaki would end up failing that test, and it would later be revealed that he was partially colorblind with the colors red and green. And Azaki was very upset and distraught about this, and he would have to attend the Yatsushiro East Commercial High School instead. And so he started attending that school in 1983, and he would have to pick a sports club to participate in. And since he had been playing baseball since he was at the age of 10, he would pick that as his sport of choice to play. But Azaki was still not very good at it, and he at this time he was nearly 6 feet tall, but he only weighed like 110 pounds, and it made him stand out. Again, speaking from experience, I sympathize here. I was 5'10", and I probably weighed 110 to 120 pounds during the last year or so that I was playing baseball. So it's really sad I didn't start working out until probably a couple of years after, but kind of looking back, I wished I'd started working out a lot earlier in life, but it is what it is. He would get bullied. Azaki would get bullied every day in high school due to his weight and him not being a very good player. I got bullied for the same thing. I'm very much against bullying, and bullying, unfortunately, it's never going to stop, but folks, we've got to take a stand. I mean, really don't know what else to say other than it's really weird that as I'm reading this, sorry if I'm getting a little choked up here, but you all heard in a previous podcast that I had with JC Flash several months back that I was bullied a lot, and it sucked. It's really crazy to hear how some of these big, strong wrestlers, that you grew up idolizing, that they were picked on and bullied and stuff, and you don't never think of them being, real skinny or scrawny people or being bad sports players, but then you read about it, and it's just really hard to fathom. But anyways, sorry. Azaki would be so depressed after ninth grade that he would make a request to his parents that he be allowed to drop out. His father would refuse and told Azaki that he had to stick with something no matter how hard it got. Azaki would just have to deal with the bullying. He would ride his bike to school every day, and eventually he made a friend who also rode his bike to school. And that friend would end up suggesting to Ezaki that he try out judo as his sport of choice instead of baseball. Ezaki would end up dropping out of baseball and would begin training in judo. And he eventually received, and I don't know much about martial arts or judo or anything like that, but he would receive a Shodan black belt in judo. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Ronda Rousey, if I'm not mistaken, I think she was in judo, and obviously we know the career that she wound up having in the UFC and then eventually the WWE. And also, this guy's name doesn't get mentioned a lot, but God rest his soul, he was known as Bad News Allen, but in the WWF back during the Golden Era, he was referred to as Bad News Brown. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I'll need to do some research on this, but I do believe that he was also in judo, and if I remember correctly, I think he was in the Olympics. I think he represented the U.S. In judo back in maybe 76, 77, maybe 78. I don't remember, but I'll have to look that up. But Ronda Rousey, she was pretty badass, and Bad News Brown, he was a badass as well. So, but that'll be a discussion for another day. Ezaki would eventually begin weight training while he was training in judo, and he would pay $1 a day to go to a local gym in Kumamoto. He would train every day there, and one time while he was training, it was on a day that New Japan was in Kumamoto for a show. He would see the late Andre the Giant come into the gym and train, and see, he was just astonished at just how massive that Andre was in person. Ezaki would also have the desire of becoming an actor. Actually, let me backtrack right quick. I'm not saying that Andre didn't train, but if this was around this time frame, this would have been a couple of years, 2 or 3 years before his back was starting to cause him a lot of issues, and before he wound up having surgery on his back and all that. But whether or not Andre trained, when Ezaki saw him in person, that's irrelevant. But I could imagine just being in the presence of someone like that would be just an amazing experience. Ezaki would have the desire of becoming an actor while in high school. He would act in his high school play called Sukuban Deka in 1986, which was about a delinquent schoolgirl who is taken by the government and forced to fight crime to redeem herself. The character Ezaki would play was named Kyoichiro Jino, who is the mentor of the main girl in the play, and he got to play a lead male character. Eventually, Ezaki would graduate from Yatsushiro East Commercial High School in March 1987. He would begin attending Kumamoto Commercial College, which would later become the Kumamoto Gakuen University. It's a private college in which the classes were at night. Ezaki would get a day job at a local coffee shop, and he would meet his college friends there. He would also be informed that he could attend the college gym for free, and this would enable him to continue weight training. Ezaki would train at the gym, and then he was informed about a local promotion called the Sayodai Wrestling Association, and they were looking into bringing in new college students. Ezaki originally would think about it, and he was originally against the idea because he did not feel comfortable wrestling in front of people in so little clothing at just 160 pounds. But Izaki's love for pro wrestling would continue to grow, and he decided to go for it. So, excuse me. So when Izaki started working out, folks, he was 100, 110, 120 pounds, and now he's built himself up to 160. I don't know what the time frame was, if that was like a year or whatever, but I started working out when I was 17 back in 2003, like consistently training, and I wound up, which right now I'm about between 228, 230 pounds, but within a year, whenever I graduated high school back in May of '04, I wound up getting up to about 165, 170 pounds. So, I mean, it is possible, you know, to bulk up and all that and everything. But again, I don't know what the time frame was when Izaki was getting the results, but good for him. Sorry for the ranting and raving there, folks. Izaki would apply for the Sayodai Wrestling Association, and he would be one of 3 people accepted into the group that particular semester. The other 2 were Kengo Matsuda and Masashi Honda, and Honda would go on to become Hayabusa's biggest rival, Mr. Ganosuke. The 3 boys would meet up at the dorm rooms, and they would celebrate like a lot of other people do, drinking, and they were chugging a lot of beers. Apparently they drank for hours until, which I'll word this as best as I can. They would drink for hours until Izaki would have to leave due to being sick. I'll just say it like that. After Izaki was done, he would hear someone else that was sick due to all the drinking, and he would see that the other person that got sick was Masashi Honda, or Mr. Ganosuke. Izaki would ask out loud when he was going to stop doing such stupid things, and then Honda would respond that he just became a wrestler, so they are supposed to do stupid things, which got a laugh out of Izaki, and from that moment on, a lifelong friendship was born. A trainer by the name of Takashi Ishikawa would teach Izaki, Honda, and Matsuda the basics of how to work a match. Izaki and Honda would spar for the first time in these training sessions, in which it would actually be 4 years before they would ever have a match against each other. On November 2nd, 1987 in Kumamoto, Eiji Izaki would work his first ever match of any kind, teaming up with Masashi Honda, who would go by the name Incho, and Kengo Matsuda, as they would take on upperclassmen Hasibe, Yukimura, and Ishijima. And while Izaki would be able to throw his very first drop kick, the match would be a mess, with all the young boys just wanting to get their moves in and not really knowing what they were doing before Matsuda would end up taking the fall. Izaki would continue working for the group for the next 4 years with Honda. They would change in tents and hold many shows outside, even in the cold in December. I do want to say this before I continue on. I don't know if you can find the match on YouTube, but I do know back in the summer of 2018, there was a match between Kazuchika Okada and Minoru Suzuki. And they had a 30-minute match in the pouring down rain. I don't know of any other promotion that would ever do that, but when that happened, I was really shocked. But then once I read through this and stuff and saw that they would hold many shows even in the cold December weather, yeah, yikes is all I have to say. But anyways, Izaki would pay the consequences of working with inexperienced kids, as one time early on, he would get his head busted open and blood would be pouring all down his face during the match. And another time he would suffer a bone fracture and would not be able to wrestle for a good length of time. Izaki around this time would also begin to enjoy his college days just a little too much, as he would begin bar hopping every night instead of going to his classes. As a college graduate myself, it's very tempting to want to go to parties. I know I went to a few frat parties back in the day. I did go to some bars, and yes, I did get drunk. I had way too many, and then I paid the consequences for that that night and the next day. But it happens. But anyways, he wound up dropping out of Kumamoto Commercial University due to failure to attend his classes. And after 4 years, he had no degree to show from it. Izaki's parents, who had taken over the hotel, and they were making good money, they actually cut Izaki. They cut him out financially due to him being kicked out of school. The only exception they would make is if he was to return back home and work with them at the hotel. Izaki and Honda would be on a bus together when Honda would suggest that he wanted to move to Kawagoe in Saitama. Izaki was confused and, not even knowing where that was exactly, asked him why, and Honda would explain that he was going to join the FMW dojo, which that's where the dojo was located, at that location I just mentioned to you. Honda would suggest that Izaki join him as well, since Izaki was no longer in college. Izaki knew what FMW was, but was not impressed with that style of wrestling. And he only knew of one wrestler, and that was the founder of FMW, that being Atsushi Onita. And Izaki hated Onita while Onita was in All Japan. Izaki stated that he was just going to live back at his parents' instead. Honda would set off for Saitama. Sorry folks, you're hearing my cat cough in the background. I apologize for that. Sorry about that. Honda would set off for Saitama when Izaki would go to a payphone and begin dialing the numbers to his parents, letting them know that he had changed his mind and decided to go with Honda instead of going back home. Izaki, with the help from the Saodai Wrestling Association students pitching in together, they would pay for a tour bus ticket, not a tour bus ticket, they would pay for a bus ticket for Izaki to go from where he was at currently in Hakata to Tokyo. Izaki would end up meeting Honda at the bus station, and Honda was very surprised. Honda and Izaki would take the 14-hour overnight bus ride from Hakata to Tokyo from January 31st to February 1st, 1991. They would then try to find out where Kawagoe in Tokyo was, and to their surprise, they would end up finding out that Kawagoe was not in Tokyo like they had thought, but it was actually in Saitama. They would have to take the subway from Shinjuku in Tokyo to Kawagoe in Saitama. The two would enter the FMW dojo with 40 other people, and Tarzan Goto was assigned as their trainer. Goto would make Ezaki, Honda, and the other students do 500 Hindu squats. God bless. 300 push-ups. Sheesh. And 100 sit-ups to prove they were physically worthy of making it in the FMW dojo. Alright, so folks, I've never done a quote Hindu squat before. Now I've done plenty of body weight or air squats and all that, and I mean, I've done over 100, and hell, my legs are on fire. I can barely walk. If I did 500 Hindu squats, I'd be crawling on the ground just to get from point A to point B for a week. But then 300 push-ups, I think the best I ever did in one sitting without stopping was probably 70 without stopping. Sheesh. And 100 sit-ups don't even get me going on that. I've got the dad bod belly, and yeah, 100 sit-ups, that wouldn't work for me, brother. But basically, this was a very extreme physical fitness test, and it was just to see if they were worthy of making it in the FMW dojo. For those of you that don't know, actually, folks, excuse me just a second. Alright, folks, I apologize for that. So let me throw this out there, and I'm sure a lot of you all are familiar with this, and then I'm sure there are some of you that are not, but over in Japan, which they've done this for New Japan, they've done it in All Japan, and obviously they did it in FMW, their training facilities were called dojos. So that's a very common thing, especially for a lot of the Japanese wrestling promotions. So over here, we have training schools or training academies. Over there, they're just called dojos. Anyways, so Ezaki and Honda would have to be interviewed by Tarzan Goto. Ezaki would be number 13, and after his interview, he would be told by Goto that he had failed. Ezaki would start to freak out after failing before Goto would begin laughing and letting him know that he was just kidding and that he had made it. Honda would be the next person to be interviewed, and with Ezaki waiting outside for him, when Honda came out, he would have a smile on his face. Only 2 people would pass out of the 40 people that were trying out, and that would be Masashi Honda and Eiji Ezaki, as they were officially accepted into the FMW dojo. Ezaki would return home to Yatsushiro, to the Japanese hotel that his parents had taken over from his grandparents, and as I said earlier, his parents were now running that hotel. He would inform them about dropping out of college, but that he had been accepted into the FMW dojo. His parents would be furious about this decision and would let him know that since he was the firstborn, he would have been on track to secure the hotel before taking over for his parents. Ezaki would end up living with his parents for another 2 weeks before finally receiving the call that they were ready for him to return to Saitama and live in the FMW dojo. Ezaki and Honda would become the newest members of the FMW dojo, as Akito Ichihara, Yukihide Uno, and Katsutoshi Niyama, who at that time was known as the Shooter, they were already living in the dojo. Ezaki and Honda would not even know who Niyama was until later, as he had only wrestled with a mask on, so they were unable to identify him without the mask. They would encounter an issue right away, as there were 5 people living in the dojo and there were only 4 bedrooms. Ezaki and Honda would end up taking turns sleeping in the hallway. This was just the beginning of the hell that Ezaki would encounter. Izaki and Honda would also learn from Ichihara that they would begin part-time jobs, which neither of them knew they would have to do. This would allow them to make some money, since it would take a while before they would begin wrestling, and they would not be paid until they began wrestling. Folks, I'm just going to tell you this next little bit. It just baffled me, but here we go. They would be awakened at 6 a.m. to work out and then eat breakfast before Honda would have to drive Izaki, who did not have a license at the time, to their job at the French bed company in Kasukabe, Saitama, which sold beds for the elderly and was the biggest sponsor, and they would work there from 8 a.m. until 3:30 p.m. Then they would have wrestling training at 6 p.m. after doing 1,000 squats while getting heckled by Tarzan Goto. They would finish training at 11 p.m. They would then eat dinner and then clean the dojo until 2 a.m., leaving them only 4 hours of sleep, sometimes just in a hallway, unless Goto would randomly decide he wanted to begin practice again at 2 a.m. for a couple more hours. Whew. That's all I got to say on that. This would occur 6 days a week, with Sunday being the only day that they could catch up on their sleep. So folks, you got to think. Hayabusa and Mr. Ganosuke, they're working 7 to 7.5 hours a day. They're getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning to work out. And then when they get back from work, they're doing more calisthenics and workouts before they begin their wrestling training. And this is going on for another 5 hours. And then they have to eat and then clean the dojo, and then if they're lucky, they can get 4 hours of sleep, but that depended on if their trainer, Tarzan Goto, would allow them to. What the fuck was basically what I would have to say on that. I'd say hell fucking no. But anyways. But apparently that's just how things were done. But no, got to get a little bit more rest than 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night, and that's all I got to say. They would also have to actually, let me backtrack here, sorry. So they would get to catch up on sleep on Sunday. The only thing Izaki always had going for him was that he was a fast learner and he picked up on everything rather quickly, which did not go unnoticed by Tarzan Goto or the other students. They would also have to go to the grocery store and get food for dinner, which Izaki would always get chanko after being advised by Akito Ichihara, as it was what sumo wrestlers would eat to gain weight, and it had a lot of protein, with Izaki desperately doing anything he could to be able to gain weight back then. I definitely understand where he's coming from on that, especially whenever I first started consistently working out, and I started seeing results, but I wanted to get bigger and get stronger, and I've never heard nor have I tried chanko, but I did do the protein powders. I've done the weight gain powders. I've done creatine. I did quite a bit of stuff. No, I did not do steroids or anything like that, so I'm gonna throw that out there. But I understand why Izaki would why he would want to put some more weight on and stuff and all that. Tarzan Goto, from the start of training, would not bother to learn his students' names, and instead would give them names based on celebrities that Goto thought that the trainees had looked like. Masashi Honda's dojo name would be Ganosuke, as Goto felt that Honda looked like Japanese actor Ashiya Ganosuke. Eizaki's name would be Ken, as he felt that Eizaki looked like Japanese singer and actor Kentaro Shimizu. Tarzan Goto would like to have his students spar. Eizaki, despite being a Shodan black belt in judo, would always be paired with either Katsutoshi Niyama or Tarzan Goto. Niyama had trained in submission arch wrestling and would always be able to take down Eizaki. Eizaki would go up against Tarzan Goto as well, and with Goto being double the size of Eizaki, Eizaki would have no chance and would be taken down by Goto as well. The first time Eizaki would enter Korakuen Hall in Tokyo would be on February 26, 1991, and that was to help set up the ring. It was not an easy job, as Korakuen Hall would be located on the 5th floor, so wrestlers would have to bring up parts of the ring at a time up the elevator. Eizaki would be brought to the locker room where he would be introduced to and bow in front of Sambo Asako, Riki Fuji, and his boss Atsushi Onita. Eizaki's job would be to greet fans and help them to their seats. He was told to watch the matches, but to not react to any of the matches. While watching a match between Yukihide Uno and El Pandita, who was doing his act for the first time, causing all the fans in the crowd to laugh, Eizaki would begin to laugh hysterically. Eizaki, after he realized that he was laughing, he tried to play it off as he was coughing and hoped that nobody had noticed. Later that night, while back in the dojo, Eizaki would be working with Tarzan Goto, who would end up punching Eizaki right in the face very hard and stated that it was for laughing at the show earlier. Yikes. Eizaki and Honda would be informed on April 20th, 1991, that they would be participating at a banquet that was put on by FMW for its sponsor, and that they would have to go up and make the audience laugh, with Onita telling them that they would be dismissed from FMW if they were not funny. Eizaki and Honda would put on a performance like they were bodybuilders and pose with Eizaki wearing a Speedo, which would make the audience laugh. Eizaki and Honda would get backstage and be told by Onita that he thought it was boring, although they were not told if they were actually being dismissed or not until Shoichi Arai, and you folks will hear that name a little bit more as this series continues. But Arai was the ring announcer for FMW, and he also worked in the office. He introduced himself to Eizaki and let him know that he would be a very important person for FMW one day. May 5th, 1991, at the Nagoya International Center, Eizaki would be ordered by Tarzan Goto 2 hours before the show would start that he was making his professional wrestling debut. Eizaki did not feel ready and did not have any wrestling tights to wear, but he had no choice. He wound up borrowing Uno's red wine tights and teamed with Amigo Ultra, who would later be known as Damien, and they would defeat the team of Yukihide Uno and El Pandita, with Eizaki delivering a drop kick and a spinning heel kick to Uno during the match before Amigo Ultra would end up getting the pinfall. Eizaki would get backstage and get yelled at by Goto for pulling out a spinning heel kick in his debut match, as you were only supposed to do basic moves in your first match. He would then find out that the only reason he was called to have his debut match was because Akito Ichihara had injured his wrist and was unable to wrestle on the show. Eizaki would go up to Uno afterwards and bow and thank him for the match, which Uno would just respond with a demand for making sure his tights were washed and returned neatly. Eizaki would make his first ever, as I guess they would say a payoff or a payday from pro wrestling. He received an envelope of 5,000 yen, which would be roughly around $50 American. He would also receive coverage in Pro Wrestling Weekly for his debut match. It actually made his friend Honda jealous because Ezaki would be the first to debut. June of 1991, at the Akita Prefectural Gym, Ezaki's second match would be a handicap match, as Ezaki would be booked in the match at the last minute to team with Akito Ichihara against the Gladiator, who I mentioned earlier was the late Mike Awesome. And the Gladiator was basically the monster heel for FMW. Excuse me, folks, I'm going to load up on some chaw here. Normally I'd be getting some chaw from a can of Grizzly, but I decided to switch it up and got me a bag of America's Best, or what we used to call Red Man. It's the Select Blend. It's actually really good. Alright. On June 19th, 1991 at the Akita okay, actually I just said that, sorry. It would be a squash match for the Gladiator, who was basically told to just go out there and destroy Ezaki and Ichihara and make them both pay their dues. Ezaki afterwards will begin to throw up dark blood backstage, which scared him that he could possibly die from the punishment that he just took. Goto would see Ezaki hurt following the match and tell him to just lay down, with Shoichi Arai coming by to ask if Ezaki was alright. Ezaki would not go to a hospital that night, but instead be told by Ricky Fuji that he would have to go out to karaoke with him instead, with an FMW sponsor. I really have no words for that, but I'm just going to say that was a different time and a different era back then. On June 22nd, 1991, at the Hokkaido Haboro Elementary Gym, Ezaki and Honda would both wrestle in single matches for the first time in their career. The show would be held at an elementary school where they would use a classroom as the locker room and the chalkboard that would list the matches of the show with both Ezaki and Honda's names on it. AG would wrestle his first singles match against Yukihide Uno, and he would lose to the Boston Crab. And Masashi Honda would face off and lose to Akito Ichihara, with Ezaki feeling it was his real debut, and that June 22nd, 1991 was the day that both Ezaki and Honda could call each other professional wrestlers. After the show, there would be only one hotel in Haboro, so the entire roster could not stay in the hotel. FMW would only book the foreigners to stay at the hotel, while the native FMW wrestlers would spend the night at a camping lodge. Atsushi Onita would congratulate both Eiji Ezaki and Masashi Honda for their singles debut matches earlier, and then would come up with the idea, due to photographers from the Pro Wrestling Weekly magazine there, that he would try to gain some publicity by announcing that as a way to celebrate their debuts, they would be using firecrackers, but the twist would be that they would have to celebrate by setting the firecrackers off out of their, oh my God, the firecrackers off out of their, well, I'll say it as the Cultaholic Wrestling video said, out their jacksies, basically. Yeah. Izaki and Honda would go rock, paper, scissors to see who would go first, and Izaki lost. Are you freaking kidding me, Onita? Is all I got to say on that. Needless to say, they both went through with what Onita told them to do. And unfortunately, it did gain FMW the attention. The pictures were published in the magazine, and that would be the first thing that casual fans would know about Eiji Izaki and Masashi Honda. What the fuck, Onita? I mean, this is some insane pre-Vince Russo nonsense. I mean, gosh, man. Izaki would then face off against Masashi Honda for the first time on June 26, 1991 at the Hokkaido Ashikawa Prefectural Gym, with Honda getting the victory over Izaki. Izaki would eventually get his first career victory over Honda on June, just 3 days later on June 29th at the Hanamaki Citizen Gym. On June 30th at Korakuen Hall, Izaki would face off against Yukihide Uno, and again Uno, he did not show any mercy on Izaki, and Uno would get the win. And this would be the first, and this was one of many matches for Izaki at Korakuen Hall. Izaki was considered the best of all the young students, especially by Onita. Whenever he would have the chance to watch the training going on in the dojo, Izaki would also be given the role as Onita's main assistant, whereas Honda would become Tarzan Goto's main assistant. On August 24th at Korakuen Hall, Izaki would team up with Yukihide Uno, who would continue to give him problems out of jealousy, and they would lose to the team of El Pandita and Akito Ichihara, with Pandita picking up the win over Izaki. On September 23rd at the Kawasaki Stadium, Izaki and Honda would wrestle in the biggest match of their career at the time, in the opening match of the biggest FMW show against each other. Honda had previously complained about stomach problems. He was informed that it was his appendix and that he would need to have it removed. However, Honda instead chose to take whatever drugs he could take to kill the pain just to get through the match. Izaki had to be very careful while working the match due to Honda's condition, with Izaki getting the win. Supposedly, Honda would never end up getting his appendix removed. Now, folks, I am no doctor, but even I know appendicitis is nothing to mess with. But anyways, I digress. FMW ran a tour in October of '91, and you would actually see Masashi Honda getting pushed into main event matches and would be given the new ring name Ganosuke Honda, based off of Tarzan Goto's nickname for him. That name would end up making it one day before it would be changed to Mr. Ganosuke. Izaki would be happy for his friend, but envious as well. But he would understand that him getting the push due to him having a bigger frame, and that was made to handle the punishment that they were doing for their street fight main event matches. However, Mr. Ganosuke ended up suffering an injury, and he would wind up having to miss the rest of 1991. Now, November 20th, at the Osaka Prefectural Gym, Izaki would team up with Uno, well, I'm just going to call him Uno, as they would lose to Korean martial arts, the Korean martial arts team of Chong Sumusu and Kim Shunki, and those two were participating in the World's Strongest Tag Team Tournament, and Chong would get the pin on Uno. The tournament would also bring in the legendary Sheik. And when I say Sheik, I mean Eddie Farhat, not Sheiky Baby Khosrow, or who we knew as the Iron Sheik. The Sheik would team up with his nephew, and who you all know as the suicidal, homicidal, genocidal maniac from ECW that we called Sabu, God rest his soul. And Sabu was actually making his Japanese debut at this particular show. On November 24th in Tsuyama, Ezaki would wrestle Sabu. Sabu would get the victory over Ezaki in just over 3 minutes. Ezaki, who is still what they called a young boy in Japan, young boy or young lion is just a term for trainee. And I did not know this at the time when I first started watching Hayabusa's matches, but Hayabusa actually idolized the Sheik and Sabu, but he also feared them at the same time, and respectfully so, or justifiably so. Ezaki would actually earn the respect of both of them after time, and would eventually be considered the Sheik's favorite, to where Ezaki could call him Papa Sheik. On November 27th, at the Shizuoka, I think that's how you say it, at Shizuoka, Ezaki would end up teaming with Katsutoshi Niyama, who was still going by the Shooter, and they would take on the Sheik and Sabu in a Falls Count Anywhere street fight. And Ezaki would end up getting a drop kick in on Sabu. However, Ezaki ended up getting busted open, and he was bleeding pretty badly in this match before Sabu pinned him in under 2 minutes. But on December 5th at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki would wind up teaming up with his favorite, quote-unquote favorite person to tag with, Uno, as they would lose to the Mercenaries, who were Billy Anderson and Louis Spicolli in masks, and they would win after Spicolli pinned Ezaki. On December 9th at the Tokyo Bay NK Hall, that was where the finals of the World's Strongest Tag Team Tournament took place. And Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto wound up winning the tournament. Ezaki would team with the Shooter again to take on the Sheik and Sabu. And again, it would be chaotic with the Sheik using his infamous fork. And Sabu delivered the Arabian Press to defeat Ezaki in under a minute. Folks, if you haven't seen any of the legendary Sheik matches, give it a look on YouTube. Abdullah the Butcher wasn't the only one to use forks in matches. I'll just say that. I don't want to spoil all that for you, but the Sheik also liked to use fireballs and whatnot. And also, I'll throw this out there as well. If you haven't had a chance, the most recent season of Dark Side of the Ring, there was an episode for the Sheik, and I knew just a little bit about him, but I learned quite a bit from that episode. But anyways, now moving on to 1992, on January 6th at Korakuen Hall, Ezaki would team up with Katsuji Uda, who was a boxer, and also Atsushi Onita's personal bodyguard. They would take on the team of the Gladiator Mike Awesome and Jim Peterson. And just like 6 months earlier, even though Ezaki got in a little more offense, the Gladiator wound up destroying him before pinning Ezaki. On January 9th in Koga, Izaki would team up with Mr. Ganosuke, and their team name would be called the Kyushu Express, due to both of them being from the area in southern Japan, which was Express coming from a takeoff of the Rock and Roll and Midnight Express. The Kyushu Express suffered a loss to the Gladiator and Jim Peterson, as the Gladiator would pin Izaki in under 5 minutes. Shoichi Arai would inform Izaki and Ganosuke that since they were going to tour in February in Izaki's hometown of Kumamoto and Ganosuke's hometown of Nagasaki, that the company wanted them to invite their parents to see them wrestle. Izaki would speak with his parents for the first time since leaving a year earlier and let them know about the show on February 4th. They would just respond with okay, but not give an answer on whether they would be attending or not before hanging up the phone. On February 4th in Kumamoto, Izaki would open the show against Uno in his hometown. He would hear cheers and chants for his name, and then he looked over and he saw his parents in the front row cheering him on. Izaki would go on to defeat Uno in the first match that his parents would ever see him wrestle in. Izaki and Mr. Ganosuke would meet after the show and visit Yoshinori Murata's wrestling restaurant, which was apparently a frequent place that they would attend throughout college as they would drink together, and they also became close with Murata. Murata was a big wrestling fan. Izaki and Ganosuke would see Murata for the first time that night as pro wrestlers, with Ganosuke proudly wearing an FMW jacket as they were living their dream. On March 25th at Korakuen Hall, Izaki would open the show against the Shooter and would lose, much like he would do in their spars, as the Shooter would use his submission arch wrestling to make Izaki tap out. Izaki would continue to live in the dojo with Ganosuke in a small dark room and train during the day. A new class of men wanting to become wrestlers would be accepted in the FMW dojo as Shoji Nakamaki, who was accepted due to him being a famous baseball writer in Japan, and FMW wanting the publicity of Nakamaki's training to be a wrestler for the newspaper and magazines, as well as Koji Nakagawa. Even better news for Izaki was that Uno, who along with Akito Ichihara had both gone to Mexico for an overseas study, allowing both Izaki and Ganosuke their own room, and they would no longer be the young rookies any longer, as Izaki continued to grow his hair out and begin to incorporate more high-flying moves to his arsenal, like the moonsault, which at that time was rarely seen in wrestling. And if I'm not mistaken, around this time, the only ones that I remember doing a moonsault would have been the Great Muta or the late Owen Hart. On April 23rd at Korakuen Hall, Izaki would defeat Koji Nakagawa, who he would be partnered with for the next year, as Izaki would go up against Nakagawa due to the fact that their body frames were very similar to each other's. And Mr. Ganosuke would continue to work in upper mid-card matches with Tarzan Godo. On May 15th at the Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico arena, Izaki would team up with Rey Mysterio Sr. and Ultraman 2000 as they would take on the team of Billy Anderson, Luis Piccoli, and Jesse Hernandez, with Mysterio getting the pin on Hernandez. Izaki would be so happy to get out of Mexico as soon as possible because the hotel air conditioner would not work, the water in the bathroom was brown, and they could not leave their hotel to go to places because of the crime in Mexico. they wound up taking a bus to America. On May 16th, at the Los Angeles, California State Gym, Izaki would team up with Mr. Ganosuke and Ultra Taro as they would face off against Los Mercenarios Americanos, and Hernandez would get the pin over Izaki. Although America would be better than Mexico, and the FMW roster would get to shop around and go to Universal Studios, where Izaki would get to ride the Jaws ride while there, the trip experience would be ruined when Izaki would hear multiple gunshots outside the parking lot of the hotel that they were staying at while trying to sleep at night. Izaki and the FMW crew would head back to Japan the next day, with Izaki happy to be back in his home country. On May 24th at the Tokyo Ariake Coliseum, the Kyushu Express would open the show in a loss to Riki Fuji and Katsutoshi Niyama, now going by his new gimmick, the Great Punk, as Punk would end up getting the win over Izaki. Izaki's life would change at this show without him even knowing it. A young woman in her early 20s named Harumi would attend this show after being invited by her friend. Harumi had no interest in wrestling and was only going as a favor to her friend. Harumi would look at the FMW program and see the picture of Izaki. She would be really attracted to Izaki and began attending all FMW shows in Tokyo just to see him. She would stay after the shows to get a picture of Izaki, who was shocked as fans only wanted at that time pictures of Onita. AG and Harumi would begin to talk after the shows and begin to see each other following the shows, as well as starting a long-distance relationship by the end of the year. Alright, well, folks, I'm going to end the episode on that note. And like I said, there's a lot of information on the life of Hayabusa, and this is just scratching the surface in the beginning years of his wrestling career. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this going forward, if I'm going to do just maybe one episode a week or a couple of episodes a week, but anyways, this has been something I've been really wanting to do for a while because, like I said, Hayabusa was one of my favorite Japanese wrestlers. If you haven't had a chance to watch his matches on YouTube, give it a look. I mean, the guy was incredible, and it's actually a shame he didn't go to other promotions like, you know, stateside like WCW or WWF at the time. But anyways, I will have this posted on my platforms, and if you get a chance, listen to this episode, give it a like and subscribe. And again, to all of my subscribers and listeners, thank you very much for your support. It is greatly appreciated. And folks, this is Grizzly Andrew signing off, saying take care and God bless.